The submarine that shouldn't exist. The ocean has always been a place where secrets survive longer than on land. Sunlight dies quickly below the surface, sound behaves strangely, and entire machines can vanish without leaving a trace. During the Cold War, when paranoia ruled and silence was a weapon, the world's most terrifying battles did not happen in the sky or on land. They happened in the dark, crushing depths of the sea. And hidden in those depths, the Soviet Union built something so extreme, so reckless, and so far ahead of its time that even its own engineers feared it. This was the submarine that could outrun torpedoes. A machine that broke every rule of naval warfare. A submarine that many Western analysts initially refused to believe was real. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the oceans had become chessboards. American and Soviet submarines stalked each other silently, armed with nuclear weapons capable of ending civilization in minutes. Detection meant death, speed meant survival, and yet, traditional submarines were slow, heavy, and predictable. Torpedoes were faster. Once launched, escape was nearly impossible. Naval doctrine on both sides assumed one simple truth: no submarine could outrun a torpedo. That assumption would soon be shattered. Deep inside secret Soviet-designed bureaus, military planners asked a forbidden question: what if a submarine didn't try to hide? What if it simply ran faster than anything sent to kill it? The idea sounded insane. Water is unforgiving. Drag increases exponentially with speed. Noise explodes. Structural stress becomes lethal. But the Soviet Union, driven by desperation and ideology, was willing to gamble everything on radical engineering. The result was Project 705, known to NATO as the Alfa-class submarine, a vessel that would redefine what was physically possible beneath the sea. From the very beginning, the Alfa-class was not designed like a normal submarine. It was designed like a weaponized experiment. Its hull was made from titanium, a material almost unheard of in submarine construction at the time. Titanium was incredibly strong, resistant to corrosion, and non-magnetic, making it harder to detect. But it was also brutally difficult to weld, insanely expensive, and required entirely new industrial processes. The Soviets didn't care. Cost was irrelevant. Secrecy was absolute. Speed was everything. Inside the hull, the madness continued. Instead of a traditional nuclear reactor cooled by water, the Alpha used a liquid metal-cooled reactor, using molten lead bismuth alloy. This allowed the reactor to generate immense power in a compact space, giving the submarine acceleration unlike anything the world had ever seen underwater. But it came with horrifying risks. If the reactor cooled too much, the liquid metal could solidify, permanently destroying the system. Crews lived with that risk every second they were submerged. Then there was the crew itself, or rather, the lack of one. The Alfa-class was designed to be almost fully automated, requiring a crew of just around 30 men, less than half of what similar submarines needed. Entire compartments were controlled by computers at a time when computers were massive, unreliable, and barely trusted. Soviet designers believed that fewer humans meant fewer mistakes and faster reactions. But it also meant that when something went wrong, there were fewer hands to fix it, and less time to survive. When the first Alfa-class submarine entered the water in the late 1960s, it looked like a predator. Short, compact, aggressive. It did not glide like other submarines, it lunged. During early trials, Soviet commanders realized they had created something almost uncontrollable. The submarine could accelerate from slow patrol speed to over 40 knots underwater in seconds. That speed was not just impressive, it was terrifying. Most Western submarines struggled to reach half that speed. Even torpedoes of the era could be challenged under certain conditions. NATO first detected something was wrong when sonar operators began reporting contacts that behaved impossibly. Submarines that accelerated too fast, turns too sharp, noise profiles that made no sense. At first, analysts assumed equipment errors. Then they assumed exaggerated reports. But the sightings continued. The same contact would appear, vanish, reappear miles away. It hunted NATO submarines, not the other way around. And worst of all, when torpedoes were simulated during exercises, the contact simply ran away. The psychological impact was enormous. Western naval doctrine collapsed overnight. Submarines were supposed to be silent hunters, not sprinting predators. The Alfa-class didn't just threaten ships, it threatened the very logic of undersea warfare. American submariners began referring to it as a mad dog, unpredictable and lethal. One U.S. Navy report famously stated that if war broke out, encountering an Alfa-class would be deeply unsettling, even for experienced crews. But speed came at a terrible cost. At full power, the Alfa-class was deafeningly loud. It could be heard across vast distances. It was not a stealth submarine, it was a shock weapon. Its role was interception, rapid response, and terror. It could reach enemy submarines faster than they could react, fire its weapons, and vanish before counterattack. In theory. In reality, the submarine was as dangerous to its own crew as it was to the enemy. The reactor required constant heat even when docked. Maintenance was a nightmare. Training was brutal. Soviet sailors whispered that serving aboard an Alpha was a death sentence disguised as prestige. Accidents were covered up. Near meltdowns went unreported. And yet, despite everything, the submarine worked. By the 1970s, NATO had officially acknowledged the existence of a submarine that could outrun torpedoes, something once considered impossible. Emergency redesigns of Western torpedoes began. Faster propulsion, smarter guidance, new tactics. The undersea arms race had entered a terrifying new phase. But the story of the Alfa-class was far from over. Because the very features that made it unstoppable would eventually make it unsustainable. And in the end, the submarine that broke the rules of physics would be defeated not by the enemy, but by reality itself. Speed at the edge of death. By the time Western intelligence finally accepted the Alfa-class submarine was real, fear had already spread quietly through naval command rooms across the Atlantic. This was not the fear of a single machine, but of what it represented, a willingness by the Soviet Union to sacrifice safety, stability, and even its own sailors in exchange for raw performance. The Alpha was not designed to survive comfortably. It was designed to win quickly or die violently. And that philosophy became horrifyingly clear once the submarines began active patrols in the North Atlantic. When an Alfa-class submarine went to full power, the ocean itself seemed to protest. Cavitation, the formation of vapor bubbles around the propeller, erupted violently, producing a thunderous roar that could be detected hundreds of kilometers away. NATO sonar operators described the sound as metal tearing through water. But before any counter-action could be organized, the contact would already be gone, accelerating beyond pursuit range. Traditional submarines were hunters that relied on patience. The Alpha hunted through sheer momentum. It could close distances so fast that enemy commanders had seconds, not minutes, to react. This is where the legend of the submarine that outran torpedoes truly took shape. During Cold War exercises and shadow encounters, NATO submarines simulated torpedo launches against suspected Alpha contacts. The results were deeply unsettling. The Alpha could accelerate so rapidly and maneuver so aggressively that early-generation torpedoes simply could not maintain an intercept solution. The submarine did not need to dodge. It ran straight out of the kill zone, leaving the torpedo behind like a predator shedding a failed bite. This shattered decades of naval assumptions overnight. Inside the Alpha, however, speed was a curse disguised as power. At high velocity, the submarine experienced extreme structural stress. The titanium hull, while incredibly strong, transmitted vibration throughout the vessel. Crew members reported equipment shaking violently, instruments blurring, and the constant sensation that the ship was on the edge of tearing itself apart. There was no margin for error. One wrong maneuver at full speed could mean catastrophic failure, implosion, fire, or reactor disaster. The liquid metal reactor was the heart of this nightmare. Unlike conventional reactors, it demanded constant thermal stability. If shut down incorrectly, the molten metal coolant could solidify inside the system, rendering the reactor permanently unusable. This meant Alpha-class submarines could never truly relax, even while docked. Shore facilities had to provide continuous power and heat. A single power failure could doom the submarine. Engineers lived with this knowledge every day, knowing that a blackout could silently kill the vessel without a single enemy in sight. Soviet crews were elite, but they were also expendable. Selection standards were extreme. Psychological resilience mattered as much as technical skill. Life aboard an Alpha was cramped, mechanical, and unforgiving. Automation reduced manpower, but it also stripped away redundancy. If a system failed, there might be only one man capable of fixing it, and no backup. Fire suppression systems were experimental. Escape options were limited. Survival depended on perfection. One of the most chilling moments in the Alpha program came during a reactor incident that never officially happened, because it was never officially acknowledged. According to declassified fragments and survivor testimonies, an Alfa-class submarine experienced partial coolant solidification while at sea. The crew fought the reactor for hours, manually stabilizing temperatures to prevent permanent failure. Had they failed, the submarine would have become a radioactive tomb at the bottom of the ocean. NATO never knew how close the world came to disaster. Western navies responded in panic and innovation. New torpedoes were rushed into development, designed specifically to counter high-speed underwater targets. Guidance systems became smarter, speeds increased, tactics changed. Instead of chasing, NATO submarines were trained to anticipate an ambush. The Alpha had forced its enemies to evolve, a rare achievement for any weapon system. But evolution cuts both ways. As the years passed, the Alfa-class revealed its fatal flaw: it was too advanced for its own time. Maintenance costs skyrocketed. Specialized shipyards were required just to keep the reactors operational. Spare parts were rare. Training pipelines collapsed under complexity. What looked unstoppable on paper became unsustainable in reality. Soviet commanders began to question whether the price of speed was worth the constant risk of catastrophe. By the 1980s, cracks were appearing not just in titanium hulls, but in the entire philosophy behind the submarine. Stealth was becoming more valuable than speed. Silent propulsion, better sonar, and longer endurance were reshaping undersea warfare. The Alpha, once terrifying, was slowly becoming obsolete, not because it was weak, but because the battlefield had changed. Yet even as retirement loomed, the submarine's legend only grew. NATO analysts admitted that if war had broken out at the peak of the Alpha program, the results would have been unpredictable and deadly. A single Alpha could disrupt entire patrol zones, force fleets to retreat, and rewrite engagement rules in minutes. It was chaos incarnate, controlled only by physics and fear. And then, quietly, the program began to die. Submarines were decommissioned. Reactors were shut down permanently. Titanium hulls sat silent at docks, still beautiful, still dangerous. The Soviet Union itself would soon collapse, taking its most reckless dreams with it. But the question remained: was the Alfa-class a failure, or a warning? Because in the depths of the ocean, speed is tempting. And someone, somewhere, is always willing to try again. The legacy of a mad machine. When the last Alfa-class submarine slipped into silence, there was no ceremony, no celebration, and no public acknowledgement of what had just ended. These machines had never officially existed in the first place. Built in secrecy, operated in fear, and dismantled quietly, the Alfa-class vanished the same way it lived, hidden beneath layers of classified documents and unspoken memories. But its impact on naval warfare did not disappear with it. Instead, it became a lesson written in titanium and radiation, one that modern navies still study in silence. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union faced a brutal reality. The Alfa-class submarines were consuming resources at an unsustainable rate. Specialized dockyards had to remain operational year-round to keep the liquid metal reactors from freezing. Entire support infrastructures existed solely to serve a handful of submarines. One failure in the power supply could destroy a reactor forever. In a collapsing economy, this level of risk was no longer tolerable. Speed had once been a symbol of dominance, now it was a liability. Strategically, the world had also changed. Advances in sonar, satellite surveillance, and signal processing meant that loud, high-speed submarines were becoming increasingly vulnerable. Stealth had replaced raw power as the ultimate currency of undersea warfare. Modern submarines were learning to disappear rather than sprint. The Alfa-class, designed to break contact through acceleration, no longer fit the evolving battlefield. It was a predator built for a world that no longer existed. Yet NATO never dismissed the Alpha as a mistake. Western naval academies analyzed it obsessively. Declassified assessments described it as the most radical submarine ever deployed. Engineers admired its titanium hulls. Strategists respected its ability to force change. Weapons developers credited it with accelerating torpedo innovation by decades. The Alfa-class did not just challenge enemies, it reshaped them. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Alpha-class lies in what it taught about limits. It proved that submarines could exceed speeds once thought impossible. It proved that automation could replace manpower. It proved that nuclear power could be pushed to terrifying extremes. But it also proved that physics always collects its debt. Noise, heat, stress, and human fragility could not be engineered away forever. The Alpha was faster than torpedoes, but slower than reality. Today, whispers of high-speed underwater vehicles still surface. Supercavitating torpedoes, unmanned submarines, experimental propulsion systems, all echo the same dangerous temptation: speed at any cost. Yet no navy has dared to repeat the Alpha-class in full. Not because it cannot be done, but because the price is now fully understood. The Alpha was not just a submarine. It was a warning disguised as a weapon. For the sailors who served aboard it, the memories remain heavy. They rode a machine that defied logic, knowing that one mistake, one blackout, one thermal imbalance could erase them without a trace. They were faster than death, until they weren't. Their courage, often unrecognized, was forged in silence and fear. In the end, the Alpha-class did what few machines in history have done. It changed the rules, and then vanished before anyone could truly adapt. It outran torpedoes, frightened fleets, and bent the laws of naval warfare to its will. And then it proved that dominance achieved through extremity is always temporary. Because the ocean does not reward madness forever. Somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the echoes of those engines are gone now. But the lesson remains, written in classified files and cautious designs. Speed can save you once. Stealth can save you forever. And that is why the insane submarine that outran torpedoes will never truly be built again.